Welcome to OOD Works, the podcast, a show about unique individuals and the services provided by Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, the state agency that helps individuals with disabilities find a job and be more independent. Here's your host, Kim Jump.
All right, so it's great to be here with Director Kevin Miller.
Hello, Kim.
Hello, Director. This is our first podcast.
Yes, it is.
Little
do the listeners know we've tried this a couple times and we were tweaking it, right?
We have, yes.
I think we got it down pat now.
I think we do.
Yes.
We wanted it to be right for everyone.
Wow, and it's all the work of Kim. So if everybody likes us, you can tell Kim that she's done a great job, which I know she does. So
well, thank
glad
you.
to be here.
It's great having you as the first guest of the podcast. Why don't we just talk for a second about why a podcast?
Well, you said it was a good idea, Kim. So I was like, okay, this is why you're my chief of communications. No, one of the things that everybody as an administrator, a leader of an organization is you're always looking at communication. People are always going to say, well, there's not enough communication, or there's a lack of communication, or how do I know what's always going on? Excuse me. And I think that you're always looking at new ways to communicate because it's always going to be in the eyes and ears and body language of the receiver. And so podcasts are very popular. A lot of people enjoy in their commutes to listen to podcasts. And so we thought this would be another tool in the toolbox when it comes to communication. So I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I am too. In the months that I've had this role, it's been such a pleasure getting to know different people.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is that there are so many just amazing people that I've talked with, and they have stories to tell. And sometimes it's really hard to do that in just a social media post or a couple paragraphs that are part of an article. And there's so much more that could be shared if we have the opportunity to sit down with folks and really have a conversation.
Well, I think that one of the things that's important to let people know is why I got into this. And like you said, there's always a story behind it. When you're growing up or for anybody, when they take on a cause or that something becomes pertinent in their life, it's because it usually has some effect on them, no matter what age. And so, I had a sister who was born without an upper jaw and had a cleft palate and a cleft lip. And you're talking in the late 50s, early 60s, when obviously a lot of the reconstructive surgery was pretty archaic, if you could imagine. And so my mother was, I'm the youngest of 7. So, my sister was the oldest girl. And we were always taught that you don't use excuses. And so my mom was very adamant for all of us, and she was that way with my sister. And so she just did it really by, I always used to say she just kind of had her own way, like this is the way I think it should be. There was really no models for her as an immigrant from Ireland. But, so we had exposure. I had exposure to what it means about, having a disability and advocating. But it always, like most things, it really hit home for me when, my wife and I got married, and, a few years later, we were blessed to have a young child, Connor, and that young child now is 20. But, when he was 4 years old, we received a letter in the mail from his teacher, his preschool teacher, and it said, basically, have you ever thought about having Connor be evaluated for being on the autism spectrum? And my wife is a speech pathologist. She works with, she had worked with students. She's worked with individuals who have strokes and so forth like that. But when it's your child, you're kind of blind to those types of things. You're not really looking at it from that perspective. And so you would make excuses like we all did. I did. And so when he received that diagnosis, I just remember coming home, and for whatever reason, I just felt like my life was over. And I remember being fixated on what are we going to do when we're gone? And that's a very common thing I didn't realize until later. When things like this happen, at least in my case, my story, it was always about what it did to me. You know, I looked at it very selfishly at that time as a very immature father, that it was what he couldn't do and how it affected me. You know, I thought he was going to play for Ohio State, you know, be on the football team and do all these other things. And all I could worry about is because of his inability to interact socially and be able to communicate the way, you know, his mother and I, who are extroverts, you know, it was just really hard for us to understand. And so I went through a really bad time, almost 2 years. You know, my wife and I ended up going through marriage counseling. And, you know, that's another thing that I think is important for listeners. You know, having a child with a disability is really strenuous on a marriage.
It took a toll.
It took a huge toll. And, you know, we went through marriage counseling, and, you know, there were times where I thought, yeah, this isn't going to work out. But we kept at it. We just, you know, I used to joke, I'd say I'd go into these marriage counseling sessions, and it was all about what a, you know, a-hole I was, you know, and so it was like all the bad things in my attitude. And by the way, they were right. And it was just one day, I think the counselor said to me, she said, you know, when are you going to realize it's not about you? And I just felt so little and low. And I was like, my God, you know, he's the most important thing in the world to me. And my wife is as well. And yet I'm acting like it's all about me. And so I was. And it was just a really stark realization. And it was a grow-up moment as a dad and as a husband. And I just completely kind of changed what I thought I wanted to do. I was, you know, well, I thought I had it all set, you know, a good Irish Catholic boy like me, you get in public service, usually criminal justice, which I was. I was working at DYS, and for our listeners, Miss Jump worked at DYS, which is the Department of Youth Services, which is the juvenile correction system.
Just a coincidence.
Just,
that we
you
held
know,
the same job.
Yeah. Which you've always done a much better job than I ever thought of doing. And, so I just started to become an advocate, and I started to realize I could maybe use my talents in state government for the next dad and child that came down the pike that had whatever disability it is. And so, you know, I was very fortunate 8.5 years ago to get appointed, and just this last 6 months when Governor DeWine was elected, he wanted to retain me, and you know, it's been a blessing every day since. I feel like I haven't worked a day, even though my gray hair shows that I have been working every day. But you really feel like you have a purpose, and that's how I feel.
Yeah, like it's a calling for you.
Yeah.
It's personal.
It's personal. You're exactly right. It's personal, and I take it personally for other parents and individuals with disabilities as well. I look at things with a much tighter eye, a much more open eye when necessary, whatever it is, always from the slant of what's in the best interest for the people we serve. You know, I tell our staff, if it means it's going to cause a little more work for us, but it's going to make it better for the individuals we serve, well, guess what I'm going to make a decision on. So I tell people, you're not, you know, I'm not here to make you like every decision I make, but at the end of the day, I've never had to look in the mirror and go, wow, you know, this was better for somebody else, but it was at the expense of the people we serve. Always. We look at it. I've never had to look in the mirror and have regret from the fact that we did what we did because it was for the individuals we serve.
And for those who don't know, what is Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities?
Well, it's a great question because, you know, for a long time, people didn't know who we were. We used to be called the Rehab Services Commission. And we conducted an Ohio poll where they do this statistical research, and they called a certain amount of people to make sure it was a statistically valid survey. And they asked the question, have you ever heard of Rehabilitation Services Commission? And 90% of those who were polled in Ohio, which was a cross-section, so it was very representative of this is what the state of Ohio thinks, 90% of the people didn't know what rehab services was. Of the 10% who said, yeah, I've heard of rehab services, the second question was asked, what do they do? And of that subsect, 90% thought we were corrections or substance abuse agency.
Wow.
Because rehabilitation in this day and age was different than when we were created in, you know, the early 70s. And so we really worked on doing a lot of focus groups and outreach, and we did a lot of work to make it sound really easy that we changed our name to Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. And so recently we did the same type of poll, and we have more and more percentages of people, some 40% now, have said they've heard of us. And for the 60% who said they didn't, at least of that subgroup, almost 90+% said, well, obviously they must do something to help individuals with disabilities. So at least we're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And so our job is to make sure, we work with all individuals with any type of disability diagnosis to gain independence. And our main focus is through vocational rehabilitation. And so this is funding we get from the United States Department of Education. We get some general revenue from the state legislature, which allows us to draw a match for that. And then the other part of our mission is obviously trying to get the independence through work. But if we have those individuals who are unable to work, we also do all the Social Security benefit claims here for the state of Ohio. So a lot of people are shocked to usually find that out. So depending on the year and depending on the economy, since I've been here in 8.5 years, I think the first or second year I was here, we did over 200,000 claims, meaning people who file for disability to receive Social Security benefit. It's been as low in this last year around 140,000. So usually reflective of the economy as well. When the economy is really good, claims go down. And so those are our two main focuses here at the agency, is to provide a continuum of services to make sure people can feel independent. And obviously we want to try to do the work path first. And for those where that's not a possibility, there's that safety net.
Yeah. And the budget is going to do some really exciting things in terms of vocational rehabilitation. But
yes.
What is vocational rehabilitation, or VR as some call it?
Well, when you break down the word, vocation is really about work. And so we're all about work when it comes to what we're trying to do with vocational rehabilitation. Our counselors work with our, almost 400 providers that we have across the state. These are non-for-profits and for-profits who work and do trainings and different type of job skill building and resume building and career building and things like that, where we purchase services for our consumers to go through there to gain skills and knowledge bases at the direction of the counselor to start building a confidence and some skills to say, what is it that you want to do? And, it's really hard because a lot of people, and I say it doesn't matter if you have a disability, I always like to tell the story, you got to make sure you match what people want to do with what's the available skill set you can do with the jobs that are available. And so I always like to tell the story. I was really a believer that I was going to be an astronaut when I was growing up. You always hear, I want to be an astronaut. But I really would do things like research, the difference between solid rocket fuel and liquid rocket fuel. And, I could name every astronaut, all those things that I thought were important, right?
You were into it.
Right. And then when I got in 6th grade, though, they said, really? Well, here's what you got to learn, trigonometry and all this stuff. And I was like, wait a minute. As soon as you start putting letters with numbers, I think I should start thinking about public service. So here I am. But that's a very hard thing to try to go through, is a lot of individuals obviously have what their dreams are, and I think that's very important. And I always say we want to help you get as far as possible with the skill sets that we have. We're not interested in just throwing anybody in a job. That's not successful.
It's individualized.
It's individualized, and if it means you can do it and it takes a little more training or some tuition in college, then we'll do that. But what we also don't want to do is give false hope in doing something where, to use my astronaut analogy, and then celebration of 50 years of the native Ohioan Neil Armstrong stepping on the lunar surface. If today Neil Armstrong and his intelligence, who could do aerodynamics and trigonometry like nobody's business, I think he got his master's degree from Purdue in engineering. If he came in and had a disability and said, hey, I want to be an astronaut, we'd have to say, look, there's not a manned space program right now in the United States. So it's not about, the abilities part there. It's about, are we sure we could get you a job when you say that's what you want to do? Now, what a counselor would do is say, well, Neil, you're obviously gifted in math. And, what is it about spacecrafts? Let's talk to Boeing and, McDonnell Douglas and maybe some aerospace engineering companies where your talents could be utilized. That's what we're really trying to get at.
Gotcha. So the budget then, one of the new areas that the budget supports in terms of vocational rehabilitation is specifically with higher education, with a 2 and 4 year university and college system in Ohio.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that, after a couple false starts here on the budget and being able to get this thing underway now, is that, we kind of try to look at what of our strengths and weaknesses. And, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which is a subsection of the United States Department of Education, comes in every 4 years to do a complete overview of financial, programmatic, and so forth. And one of the things that, they kind of said, look, we're just putting a mirror up to you, is you don't do enough for individuals who are trying to attain higher credentials, who are either trying to get a certificate that might boost their pay, or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, something like that. And we were like, yeah, you're right. And that was because we were under an order of selection, which means individuals who were most severe, we had to serve first. As I always like to say, I never liked that. It's like saying you're not disabled enough, so you have to wait longer. But
because there was a wait list.
And there was
at
a wait
that
list.
time.
Yeah. By the time we were done, the wait list was almost 18,000 people.
Wow.
But I want to make clear that the wait list has been eliminated, and we are no longer under order of selection for the first time since 1991. So although we're really proud of that, we eliminated that back in 2015, 2016. That's in the rearview mirror. I heard someone say, your rearview mirrors are small and your windshield's really big, and that's because that's what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And so what we're really focused on is now, here's what we can do. There were a lot of things we had to talk about what we can't do because of the wait list and because of the order of selection. Well, now we're talking about what we can do, and that goes to how do we help individuals, and we know there are plenty of them. Just as an example, Ohio State has roughly 60,000 students in their student body. About 10% of them, a little over, I think it's 6,800 students, have either self-identified as having a disability or are registered with their Disability Services office. So we know there are students there. And, one of the things that Ohio is really blessed with is a very robust system of colleges and universities, especially community colleges. And so we're putting counselors, and we're not even using the term embedded. We like immersed better. They're going to report to work there at the university. They're going to be part of the team there in the Disability Services office. And I've had an opportunity to meet with all the presidents. And just to make sure, I say, I'm here to explain there's no catch in this system, Yes, we're going to put someone here, we're going to pay for them and have services paid for your students. And I remember one of the first presidents was like, okay, so you're here to explain the catch. You're telling me I don't have to give any money to this, I don't have to do this. And I said, no, I just need some space for our counselors. And they're like, hey, that's great. And so we've had such a tremendous response, because what we're finding is we're learning things as well as the universities are learning things both ways about how we can assist students with disabilities who are matriculating at one of our 2-year or 4-year schools here in Ohio. So we're going to be in about 15 of them across the state, a mix of both 2-year and 4-year public universities.
That's great. And so those counselors who are immersed in those disability service centers, what will it be that they're offering then that's different than what's already offered to the students?
Yeah, it's not so much that they're going to be offering something maybe different. It's what I would say is the level of dosage. So what I mean by that is we're not there to replace anything that the universities are doing. But for instance, here's one of the things that we find. When you have a student with a disability, and a lot of the universities are saying things like, you know what, no matter what your major is, we're going to a model where you have to do a co-op. So if you're majoring in engineering, or you're majoring in nursing, or you're majoring in criminal justice, you're going to have to do a co-op. You're going to have to go out and work somewhere or do an externship for credit at some sort of business or government agency that has to do with your major. Well, one of the things that the university presidents have said is, yeah, where we struggle is when we're going to do that, if we have students who are on an IEP or have a self-disclosed disability, we don't kind of do it's not something we do as our normal course of business to understand how to approach a business to say, hey, we also have students here with disabilities.
Right.
And businesses who maybe haven't worked in that are like, oh, well, I don't know if we could do that. And that's where we can come in. We have over 400 plus businesses that are part of our business network that are, have committed themselves to saying this is part of our culture. Well, when you look at a university or two-year college's career services office, a lot of times those two are not necessarily talking or on the same page to realize that. What we tell our counselors is we want one arm in the disability services office and one arm in the career services office, because ultimately this is about getting a job.
Yeah.
And so we can help with the externship. We can help with incoming freshmen and sophomore about, career exploration, which means what kind of major, which we know everyone's going to change, right? Everybody changes their major, it seems like, at least once. And so that's what's really critical that these counselors can do. Is it's really going to be a different way of counseling too, because it's a lot of gray. Mm-hmm. It's not black and white. And so we're really excited about it. And we think this is a new pattern of service that's going to really help make a difference for students who are looking to get into a professional career.
So exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And there are new efforts too for younger students.
Yeah. Well, when you say newer, we're expanding it. We've done, our Ohio Transition Support Partnership Program, OTSP. And for you listeners in state government, it's all about acronyms, right, Kim? So this is where, same thing like you're thinking about we're doing with colleges. We've been doing this now for about 4 years, where we're placing counselors in school districts. And in partnership with the Department of Education in those local districts. And so in this budget, Governor DeWine supported expanding that. So we're looking at putting more counselors in more school districts as well. And, I can't stress enough as a parent, parents sometimes are the biggest obstacle. So I'm speaking about myself as well here. So, I'm also a client when it comes to this. Mm-hmm. And because you're always worried about, I don't know if I want to expose my son or daughter to the harsh realities of the world. I want to protect them as much as possible. And at least what I say, and this is just my opinion, which means I could be 100% wrong, but it's just my opinion, we're not doing them any favors to not deal with the adversity. You're not going to be able to be there for everything. And you at least want to try to be able to give them the tools to understand that, you're going to have a boss who you don't necessarily get along with. There's going to be policies in a business that you go, I don't like this idea that I have to do. I don't want to wear this uniform. Well, that's what you have to do if you want to be part of that business. And so we're not doing any favors, A, if parents are not willing to at least take that, and B, as someone who is in an advocacy role and working and talking about voc rehab, businesses want to hire people. There's a huge workforce shortage, and so they're looking at all types of things, and we feel like we're right on the cusp of really making huge breakthroughs with changing the minds of a lot of businesses to understand, wow, it isn't just hire someone because it's the nice thing to do, which I say was kind of the 60s and 70s messaging with vocational rehabilitation. Oh, you're such and such business. Well, hire Kim because she has a disability and carve something out and whatever. Well, in this day and age in the global economy, you got to make money.
Right. Bottom line.
Yeah. You look at Walmart and Amazon. Amazon dictates a lot of stuff, and here's Walmart trying to keep up. Oh, we're launching our online stuff, so it's competitive. Well, businesses are not about doing the nice thing when you start getting into the red. And so what we always say is, don't take my word for it. Here, look at all these studies where hiring individuals with disabilities is as part of an effort, and you do it the right way, which is it's profitable to hire individuals with disabilities as long as you do it where you're looking at what is the skill set the person has and what is the job skill that you need to have done. And that's what we pledge to the businesses. We're not just going to send you anybody. We're going to make sure they have skill sets to deliver on the job skills that you need. And then what they find out is, wow, they show up early, they never miss work, they pass drug tests, and that gives us an opportunity too to say we'd be willing to talk and do trainings for your staff on disability etiquette. And so it opens up a bigger dialogue. And so that's where we think that, the earlier we can get in to talk to parents and say, you got to do this, the earlier we get in to talk to businesses about leaving themselves open to this type of workforce, it's going to be beneficial for them. Because here's what I tell them. Guess what? You already have people with disabilities working for you. You just don't know it.
Right.
And so, and in our work as well, a lot of times they don't know that. And a lot of people are stunned. We'll talk to them about how do we want to expand placing more people, and we go, well, we've already placed 10 people with, and they go, you have? And we go, yeah. And they're like, well, who are they? And we go, we can't tell you that. That's confidential, that's
right.
personal information. And they're like, well, we just never thought of that. I talked to a manufacturing company, and they were shocked by that. And I go, oh yeah, we've placed 10 people here, and they're still working. And they're like, they were stunned by that.
Because not all disabilities are visible.
The majority of them are not visible. So those are the things where you never know where because of one conversation, it kind of tips everything over in the right way. And then people are more into it and understand it and support it as part of their culture.
Yeah. So speaking of part of our culture, the governor, after being elected, very quickly signed an executive order. And
pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, so, it was something where we had researched and started to look at this, a couple years ago. And so I had the, meeting with the governor-elect where I was interviewing to see, he was trying to determine who he wanted to have as director of OOD. And so I talked about a couple things. He was like, what could we do? Let's, I want this to be a priority. And so we talked about this executive order, and his immediate response was, well, why wouldn't we do something like that? And what was great is if you look at a lot of states who, and there's not a lot of them who have done an executive order, but there are some. Their executive orders compared to ours, I would say ours has a lot more teeth and deliverables in it. So he signed this executive order literally minutes after taking the oath of office, and it was the third executive order he signed. So it sends a clear message. Like, you don't have to go, well, gee, I wonder what the administration thinks about, helping people with disabilities. When he signs an order like at 12:03 after taking the oath of office at midnight, yeah, I think you can kind of not have to worry about, do you need it in a mission statement somewhere? No.
Right.
The governor kind of sets the tone.
Right.
And so by signing this executive order, it said Ohio's going to be a model state of inclusion. And so a couple of the things in this executive order, and we've already have been working on this to tick some of these things off of, hiring a statewide disability ADA coordinator who has just started a couple weeks ago, who works at the Department of Administrative Services, which is kind of the administrative agency for all agencies. They kind of set the standard. So this person is actually an employee there at DAS who sets the policy tone for all the other agencies that have to follow. So that's kind of the standard bearer. Also in this budget, the governor put funding in place for us to work with every state agency to be able to place one or two, we got 40 slots, to pay for internships to increase state employment for individuals with disabilities. I mean, that's never been done before. People ask me, so what excites you? I'm like, stuff that's new, that nobody has done before.
And you should see the smile on his face.
Yes.
You're serious.
I'm dead serious. I mean, when you think about the possibilities, a lot of times, I kind of look at it as levels. There are people who go, yeah, I'm all for helping people with disabilities. And then you go, well, how many, what are you willing to do? That's where you start separating a lot of people. When I was growing up, one of my mentors, who was a priest, used to say, you know what, Kevin, there's a lot of fans, but very few followers. And so this is all about, putting your money where your mouth is and putting your effort where your priorities are. And so, the idea of saying, wow, now we're looking at not just, we want to help someone who has an opportunity to maybe work at ODOT on a highway crew where you really only need a high school diploma. But guess what? We also could call over and my friend Kim Murnix, who's the director of budget management, and say, hey, through our higher ed initiative, we've got some students here who are seniors who need a co-op, and they're in accounting or finance. And so they can go over and work at OBM, and we are paying the salary. So it then gives the state agency like, oh, wow, I don't have to, there's no catch to this other than, someone's coming here to work and learn. And obviously what we want to try to tell the state agencies, we want this to be looked upon as how do you get this person working through our staff and our counselors to get the right skill set for what you need. So hopefully they will be employed by your agency. And if not by them, maybe another state agency, because once you can get that type of experience, it's going to be a lot easier to try to find that next job.
Yeah. And speaking of finding jobs, I know another thing you're really excited about is expanding the model of involvement that we've had with the Butler County Drug Court.
The drug court,
yeah.
right. Well, and that's something that goes back to, Kim and I both say our old life when it comes to criminal justice. And, I don't need to say much more than we know there's a crisis when it comes to the opioid epidemic here in Ohio. It's touched everybody. Right. And so one of the things that Judge Spaeth, who is in Butler County, has shown some real out-of-the-box thinking was, a lot of people are doing drug courts or alternative dockets, as they're called. Well, Judge Spaeth had a drug court, and he said, I want to have a voc rehab counselor because, when someone's in recovery, that one of the best things to kind of ensure recovery or at least enhance the, success of it is that they have a job. And so they have a treatment team meeting when they say they're going to decide someone to go through this specialty docket, a diversionary program. And so they might have the local housing director, the local, Adam H. board representative, the bailiff, the probation officer, and then the OOD counselor sitting there to talk about employment, because substance use is a disability that can cause hindrance to a job. And so we can serve them for that. And the success we've seen in Butler County, this has been going on for 4 years, the percentage of success is higher than what we would see in even our traditional cases. So when the governor said, I want to make a priority on how we address the opioid epidemic, we shared, look, this is what's going on in Butler County. So again, the governor put funds in to say, replicate this in other counties. So we're looking at 14 additional counties to where we can go out both a mix of urban and rural areas, because it's all over, as we know, to replicate that model that Judge Spaeth has done. And we're working with the Supreme Court of Ohio, and we're working with our partners over at Mental Health and Addiction Services with my friend Lori Chris, who's the director. And so we're looking at, there's plenty of work there. It's not like we have to look far and wide. So we want to make sure that we stay close to the fidelity of the model that we've seen there in Butler County and get out and see what we can do in some of the other counties as part of a team to help those individuals who are in substance use and in recovery.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see that partnership and to hear that it's going to be expanding. It's great. We also we've long partnered with the Ohio State School for the Blind and the Ohio School for the Deaf, but the budget's going to enable us to do that in a new way. Yeah,
we're talking about some really big things like, 15 colleges and universities. We're talking about county-wide initiatives. Well, the Ohio State School for the Blind and the Ohio School for the Deaf have been around for generations. And it's unique in the fact that, Ohio has specific schools each for those disability students. And they're phenomenal in what they do and the advocacy groups that are associated with them. And so one of the things that the governor wanted to do, and obviously we were like, yes, absolutely, was assign a dedicated counselor just for the Ohio State School for the Blind and another counselor dedicated for the Ohio School for the Deaf. Again, that's never been done before. We've had counselors, multitude of counselors who might have, individuals on a caseload, but this will be someone who's sitting in the school And so that's going to make a huge difference. You're talking about access all the time. So you can talk about what it means to work or to skill build all the time as part of it. They're going to be in those conversations with the other school leaders. So that's huge. That's never been done before as well. So we look at really some innovative things from this whole budget. When you look at it from a package, it's all about we're here to help.
Right.
We're not going to pretend to think we have all the answers. It doesn't mean that we always, put together the best of plans. Our intentions are always to be the best thing. We get consumers who fail, but failure is a part of success as well. And so they try something out and they try out a goal and, they get discouraged or they don't think integrated employment's for them. Some don't really want to come back and try that. I understand, like I said, as a parent, I get that, the fear of that. But you know what? We see we're serving more people than we've ever served before. We're placing more people in jobs than ever before. And importantly, these last two, they're at a higher wage than they've ever been before. And most importantly, to go back to the quality aspect, they're being retained in their jobs for longer than they've ever been done before. We used to look at 90 days afterwards. Well, we're looking all the way up to a year at retention. And that's where if you do the right work up front, you're going to see that in the retention numbers later. And all of those are at the highest they've ever been. So we're really excited about it.
And OOD couldn't do this with just OOD staff.
Very far from it. I mean, like I said earlier, we've got almost 400 providers across the state. Everything from Goodwills to, local, capabilities and our site centers in Ohio and our centers for independent living. And so we really invested because in working with the fee schedule and doing some of the things over the last several years, we are able now to, from some of the funds that we've been able to carry forward, is to take that and reinvest that into the fee schedule. So we started working with our providers, probably in the fall of last year, and obviously going through the JCAR process of rulemaking to increase our fees. And we've had a ton of meetings, a ton of feedback, and we're looking at 6% increases across the board. A couple of our really key services, 8%. And we heard from them give us feedback to say, yeah, that's great, but we also need to be able to have more money up front because we were really putting an emphasis on the deliverable at the end of a job, which it still is. But I think what we're also doing is balancing it a little more up front because it takes some money to get this person started on their career path. And so we listened to that, we listened to the feedback on that, and we made those adjustments as well. So, as it starts to go through the process now, the public hearings, we've done all that work up front, and they're anxious to get this moving, and so they'll be supportive of it. So it's just another example of how the partnership, it's very much a symbiotic relationship, and we can't do it without them, and they can't do it without us. And so it's like, let's make sure we work together to do what's in the best interest of the people we serve.
Right. Yeah. And the fee schedule is really about helping providers be able to stay viable and improve quality services to clients. They know that we're always going to be looking at metrics, where, legislators are putting, deliverables and metrics on us, which means we have to get them to understand they have to take those things into consideration as well. And the successful ones do that. And so we see more and more providers coming in. Mm-hmm. So we see a lot of expansion in that, which means more choice for our individuals to choose the type of provider they want to have. And so they are committed as well to making sure that, they get into it because they want to help the individual with disabilities as well. So we're just coming at it from a couple different levels. We're a government agency, and they're a non-for-profit or a for-profit service provider. And so, it's been great. This process we've been working on only means that we're looking at hopefully better services, higher quality services that are going to make an impact. And I think we all agree on that. Yeah. Well, Director Miller, this has been just such a pleasure.
Again, right? As we said, yes.
Yes.
It's I told Kim that I didn't mind trying to do it again because I really like the idea of making sure that people who really want to get into podcasts, that they, put this on their frequently viewed list so it automatically is downloaded. That's right. Subscribe. I'm going to learn all the buzzwords, right, Kim, and say make sure you subscribe, because there's a lot of things that we are doing that make us a national model. And I don't say that lightly, because I would hear for a lot of years people stand up and say, oh, we're the best at this, the best of that. I don't say that. I only say that when I can show third-party independent verification. Mm-hmm. And so earlier this year, the Council of State Vocational Rehabilitation Membership Association asked some of our staff to come to explain some of the things we're doing in this. And Rehab Services Administration and a couple people from the CSAVR, when we got done talking about working with businesses and why it's important to do that work up front and making sure your messaging, it's about the skill sets and hiring people that are integral into the work that's being done and not some carve out. Mm-hmm. The person stood up at the end and said, this is why we asked Ohio to do this presentation. So my staff was doing the presentation for everybody who was in attendance. And for them to say that is validation of, when we started some of these things 8.5 years ago, it was really out of necessity because we had a 55% budget cut. So it was like, we got to rethink everything we're doing. And so now it's nice to see, because of some of those things, we're way ahead of the curve on some of these things. And for that to be acknowledged on a national stage, when our staff was there talking about our business relations model, how we use metrics and tracking things through our Voc Rehab, and that it shows more people being helped and they're earning a higher wage. That doesn't make us satisfied, though. As I tell everybody, we don't sit back and go, well, that's good enough. Anybody who works for me, right, Kim, knows that
There's more to do.
I'm driving all
right.
the time. We're never going to say that's good enough. It doesn't mean we don't take a moment to say, you know what, we're doing really great work, and this gives us an opportunity on the podcast to kind of share some of those things. And so we're really excited about that. So, yes, make sure that you're subscribing to this, and I'll try to stop back by every now and then when Kim comes down and says, Director, we need you to talk about this. So I will do that, Kim.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. A transcript of today's episode is available at ood.ohio.gov/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review. We're on social media at Ohio OOD. Do you have a disability? Do you want a job? We can help. oodworks.com.